Maryam Banikarim.
Maryam Banikarim.
I think today there's an incredible hunger for things that happen in real life. But when you gather people in real life, which we do for live events, it's about insights that people can walk away, be better at their job and at their life, but it's also about connections. Standing in the middle of Times Square, in the middle of the pandemic, seeing those 24 Broadway performers come together for the first time in October, literally crying as they use their voice together to create the magic of Stephen Sondheim's Sunday from Sunday in the Park with George. I mean, to think that a 12-year-old immigrant kid could be in that moment with those people, making that happen as a collective, there's nothing like it.
Welcome to Get Mic'd, the podcast exploring the ins and outs of building a notable brand. I'm your host, Katie Zeppieri, founder and chief brand strategist of the MicDrop agency. In today's episode, I sit down with Maryam Banikarim. Maryam is the managing director of Fortune Live Media, leading the media company's most powerful women and Brainstorm Tech global franchises. She is a seasoned C-suite executive with more than 25 years of experience steering major businesses through sweeping transformations and top-line growth, including Hyatt, NBC Universal, and Univision. During the pandemic, she co-founded NYC Next, a nonprofit inspired to help New York City recover and rebuild. With a grassroots army of volunteers, she produced a series of community events, including an Emmy award-winning rendition of Billy Joel's New York State of Mind. She also launched the award-winning We Love NYC campaign to mobilize New Yorkers post-pandemic. Most recently, Maryam captured attention with her inspiring TED Talk and commencement address for Columbia Business School. Fast Company has recognized her as a top 10 disruptor, Advertising Age's Women to Watch, and the New York Post's 50 Most Powerful Women in NYC. In this interview, Maryam walks through her vast career journey and describes how each opportunity led to the next. She talks about the power of taking risks, imagining big, impactful ideas, and the importance of community. I learned so much from Maryam. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Maryam, welcome to Get Mic'd.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I really like your backdrop. We've got some Fortune magazines in the background, lots of books.
Well, you're finding me in the office, right? Back to the office. Here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Are you in the office full time currently?
We come in 3 days a week. You can also find me working from my son's room, where usually I have a Batman poster or a Superman poster behind me. So it just depends on where you catch me on what day.
You mix it up depending on the day. I like it. Well, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you. You have a really incredible background in marketing, branding, communications, and so much more. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about your own journey, getting into media, getting into marketing. How did this start for you?
Well, the journey started, I was sort of a reluctant business person, having been the child of two business people. I always thought I wasn't going to go do that. I thought I would be an investigative reporter. And then I ended up going to business school and international affairs school at Columbia as a joint degree. And really, I went thinking that I was going to go study something that I could write about. And then as I was applying to SEPA, I ran into somebody who said, and I was a student with student loans, who said, you should really combine this with a business degree because you may not be able to make money with a SEPA degree, which I don't know is true, but that's what they said. And I believed them. And so I did this joint degree program. But I was younger than most people at business school. And I really wasn't like most business school students who really at that point came in with a really clear goal as to what they wanted to do. They were either using it to transition careers or you needed an MBA to get promoted. So for me, I was really there to learn. So I took lots of classes trying to figure out like what all these business jobs or careers were. In an instance that, sort of ended up being the thing that transformed my career is that when I'd been an undergrad, I'd written this travel column about being an insider in different cities because I was a kid who'd been moved around a lot. That was the year that The Gap had produced this iconic campaign called Individuals of Style. That campaign was so successful that they localized it. They ended up featuring people like John Lurie in New York, John Lurie was kind of an indie New York figure. He used to hang out at this bar called Max Fish. I'd written about Max Fish, the bar, and I was like, oh, they should actually combine my guides with their ads and create a travel guide that they sold in the Gap. This is what we now call branded content, but that wasn't a thing back then. I'd mocked it up and tried to get a meeting at the Gap and nothing had come of it. Well, fast forward, I'm in business school and I had this mock-up still on my bookshelf, and a friend came over and picked it up and he said, Mickey Drexler, the president of the Gap, spoke to our retailing class. He's really accessible. You should send this to him. So I end up taking this product development class. Everyone's developing line extensions of Oscar Mayer, products. And I convince our group to actually research this guide and end up sending a letter in the mail, because this was before the internet, along with the mock-up to Mickey Drexler, who was then the president of the Gap, and it's finals. And the phone rings and it's Mickey Drexler.
Wow.
And, you could assume it was an episode of Punk'd, but it was in fact Mickey Drexler. He wanted to know if I wanted a career in retailing. Did I want to work at the Gap? I was like, no, I'm just trying to make the guide. And he was hysterical. He basically started asking me about some of the places I'd written about in San Francisco. And I said, oh, well, I love the Ace Cafe. In fact, I come home and I drive in from the suburbs to go there. And he said, oh, you're coming. Here's my calendar for the next 2 weeks. Please call me. By the way, call Susan Cooper, our head of recruiting. And I get off the phone a little discombobulated, kind of confused as to what's happened to me. 2 weeks go by and the phone rings and it's Mickey Drexler's head of recruiting, Susan Cooper. She says, Mickey said I was going to hear from you. I haven't heard from you. It's like, what is happening? Anyway, long story short, she was like, you should consider a career in marketing. This is a marketing idea. And so I always say, even though I never worked for Mickey Drexler, but him and Susan Cooper really started me on this path. And when I was graduating from business school and international affairs school, I'd done a bubble chart because, again, I really had no idea what I should do with my life. And the bubble chart said account executive in an ad agency because I was kind of a combination right brain, left brain person. Y&R was one of the few advertising agencies that recruited on campus. And that is how I started my career in advertising.
That is a fantastic story. I can't believe that. So did anything happen with the mock-up, or it just ended up being like a mentorship moment where someone identified potentially the right career path for you?
Yeah, that's literally what happened. I mean, the guide never came to being, but that story was a story that if I was going on an interview for an advertising agency, which after Y&R, I would, I was like, oh, I want to go to a smaller creative. I would tell the story and they'd be like, when can you start? And I tell people that, you need a version of the Gap story for yourself because, people get millions of resumes for these jobs. But what I learned, and now looking back, what I learned in that story is that story sort of made you stand out because not only because of, okay, she's creative, she made a book, but also because I was willing to send the book. I was willing to do follow-up. And I think it showed sort of resilience, the idea of having an idea and chasing it, right? And so we look at lots of people who have a lot of skills, but I think like we also look particularly in jobs where you're trying to make a lot happen, we look for people who are doers, right? And so I think that story sort of demonstrated like, oh, she's a go-getter. And so then that just made you pop up the page. And so when I was an executive in residence at Columbia a couple of years ago, and I would meet these young students and they would ask me for advice, I would be like, what's your Gap story? Mm-hmm. And if they didn't have one, I would say to them, okay, well, let's just walk through something and I can help you figure out how you can come up with a story like that. Because let's talk about you and me, for example. Like, Katie, you could have people who call you to be on your podcast, or you could be like, here's my wish list and I'm going to go get Oprah. And by the way, how you go get Oprah becomes your Gap story.
Yeah, I think that is such good advice. And I'll hear all the time from people looking to get started in their comms careers and or entrepreneurs kind of looking to make a leap. And there's a bit of this like fear. There's a fear of, how do I get to the other side? How do I get people who are in positions of power to talk to me? How do I get somebody's attention? And you, as a student, really just had so much courage to be willing to put your ideas out there. I'm wondering what advice you'd give to somebody who is nervous about taking that leap and maybe what they can learn from your experience.
Well, I think we're all nervous, right? I mean, we all instinctively have a fear of being rejected or the unknown. what I found when I was doing the executive residency, and I go back to that, is like, I just noticed that there was a real desire to be given permission to go do things. And I'm like, you know what? Here's my headline for you. I'm giving you permission. Just go do. Like, what do you have to lose? Like, so it's embarrassing. So it doesn't work out. So I think I was lucky because I wasn't worried about not being cool, because I pretty much was sure I was a nerd and I was not cool. So I was like, okay, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to go for it. I mean, 9 out of 10 times I did a reach out like that and it didn't pan out. But the one time it did, it was Mickey Drexler, and it led me to have this career. But I have probably a pile of letters that went unanswered, including writing to Robert Stigwood because I thought he should hire me to work on Evita the movie, which he owned the rights to. I mean, I sent those letters. I tracked down his address. I wasn't a stalker, but close. And it went unanswered. And I could have just rolled up like a ball, or I could have pushed through. And, I gave a TED Talk in December. And the title of the TED Talk, or really the thesis, was that I looked at obstacles as an obstacle course, and that made it almost like a game versus taking it personally. And it really came about because I was with a friend and we went to go see if we could get somebody to donate these flowers from a wedding. And they basically were like, no. And he said to me, okay, well, can I ask you a question? How do you feel? I mean, that was pretty unpleasant. And I said, it doesn't feel great, but I got 6 other problems to solve. And he said, well, that's interesting because I want to go roll up like a ball. Wow. And I think that reframing like makes it less personal and just gets you to focus on the goal.
I completely agree. And your TED Talk, all about, seeing obstacles as sort of opportunities within a larger obstacle course, is such a good metaphor to approach life with, because no matter who you are, you're going to constantly experience rejection or things that don't go the way that you planned. You have to pivot, all of these things. If you were to dig a bit deeper to think, where did that mindset, do you think, started for you? Where did that begin?
First of all, I grew up a child of revolution, right? I lived in Iran as a kid. In 1979, there was a revolution and we left the country. So I was sort of dropped into lots of different worlds as an early age, even as a 3-year-old when, my parents who were studying in Boston had me brought on a plane by a relative and then dropped into preschool in Boston and then moving back to Iran. I mean, there's just a lot of those things in my life. So I think the option was either roll up like a ball or find a way to push through. And I think that I had a grandmother who was a really great example of somebody who had just constantly moved and pushed through things, right? She actually had lived through the Russian Revolution. She had lost a child in a car accident. She just was one of those people who just somehow found the will to just keep going. And I think she was a great role model. And even I would say my parents, right? The revolution happened. We ended up moving first to Paris and then to Northern California. Both my parents were business people. My dad had been a banker and my mom had done TV strategy. Randomly, in that 1 year that we lived in Paris, my mom and another colleague of hers took a class on baking at the Cordon Bleu as a way to have something to do, to not just be super anxious figuring out like how the world was changing around them. Fast forward to we land in this lily white suburb of San Francisco, and they decide to open up a French bakery. What did they know about a French bakery? I mean, literally, my mom had not spent too much time in the kitchen because she was, going to college and her mother was doing all that, right? And they decided to open up a French bakery. And so I think to myself, like, I probably had this example, like just as a child. And sometimes it's out of necessity, right? I think like sometimes having too many choices can actually stop you. And I think I hear a lot of stories, particularly these days now that I'm at Fortune, where I meet a lot of really amazing, interesting women, and they'll say, I was a 3-year-old, I came from Mexico, I had no shoes, and today I am the, C-suite executive at such and such company. And I often think to myself, resilience out of necessity and the need to just push forward as a way to create pathways for yourself and your family, those are real things that drive us. And sometimes when you have too many choices, it can be almost the thing that stops you because you're like, wait, maybe I should do this. Maybe I was like, you know what? I have no choice. I'm just going to go for it. So I say to people, like, give yourself permission.
Yes, that's so true. There's something about the immigrant spirit, I think, where you're kind of you're choosing to leave what was once a big part of your life behind to pack it up and go start somewhere new. And it's almost like you've kind of cut off the other options, right? You've made this really bold decision. So you have to make it work. And I just love that your parents, very accomplished people, an Iranian couple open a French bakery. Come to was it in Paris? They open a French bakery.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I hadn't really thought of it for a long time, and then one year I was like, that really was a crazy thing that they did. And it's funny. I just actually told this story to a group of people with my mom, and somehow she said something I never knew, which was when they were trying to come up with a name for the French bakery, and this was well before people were drinking cappuccinos, right? By the way, in the middle of the hostage crisis, she said she came up with a bunch of names for the bakery and didn't know which one to pick, and basically went to the school where they had registered us and asked the principal and the people in the office for help to pick a name. So she was always actually enlisting I was like, oh, wow, I must have had that from her. So I think we just don't recognize all the things we learn from our environment, but we definitely carry them with us.
So right out of school, you began working at an agency, Y&R. I want you to walk us through sort of the highlights of your next series of career moves that led you to where you are today.
So I've had a lot of different stops, I guess I would say, which was rare in my age group. Less rare now with the new generation, because I think they all pivot much faster. So for me, I started off at Y&R. It was the early days of the internet, and I was very curious and had the energy of my grandmother. And so I would go to lectures after work to just understand what was happening with the internet. It was like the era of the internet and the CD-ROM. And I came back to Y&R, and I said, could I help organize a conference on what was happening in the internet for the agency? And Michael Schrage had written this cover story for Wired called Is Advertising Dead? I said, why don't we do this as a panel and actually ask that question? Is advertising in fact dead? So with another colleague, Susan Gluck, we sort of start organizing this conference, and I bring in Bob Greenberg. This was before he'd started RGA, and somebody from Time Warner, and my now husband, who at the time was working with him, and somebody from AT&T. And we actually hold this conference, and it was an agency-wide conference. So we invited all the different departments, which had never really happened at Y&R before. And in doing that, I sort of realized that Y&R at the time was really focused on trying to reset their business and less interested in the innovation that it was going to take to actually lead in the world, in this new world, right? And so I was like, okay, this may not be the final stop for me. And in fact, as I was organizing it, I had a mentor, and she pulled me aside and she said, I just want you to know this is a really great thing that you're doing, but it's very political. There are many people who want to own like the new media space, and you're like in their space. And I remember saying to her, well, I think it's really interesting that that's how it's perceived, because I'm just doing it as a way to learn. And if this company responds that way to my doing that, I better know that now so I don't stay here for my full career rather than later. And that's really the moment that made me decide to leave.
Wow.
And so I started looking to think about what else I would do. And I was about to take a job at a creative boutique agency because I was looking for something like that. And I went to have coffee with somebody who had left Y&R to go to Turner Broadcasting. And I went to have coffee with her. I literally had a tennis racket. I was in jeans. And she said, by the time our coffee was over, would you come to work here? And I was like, well, it's very confusing because I've just taken another job. So I leave, I cross the street. Y&R was 2 blocks away from Turner at that time. And I get back and I get called by the head of account management at Y&R. And she says, I heard that you went across the street and had this meeting because this woman had also left Y&R and gone to Turner. She said, Steve Heyer, who is running that group, is the smartest strategic thinker in the business. You should run, not walk. And I was like, what is happening to me? I mean, literally, I just made it across the street. And she said, I said, but I've taken this other job. And she said, I will call them for you and tell them that you're not coming. And I was like, okay, that's really weird because I'm an adult. So if I do this, I have to call them myself. And, the funny story is that, so I ended up deciding to make that move. I called and said, I'm really sorry. I wasn't looking for another job and I was so excited to come, but this has sort of shown up and I'm going to make this decision. And I think the not to be named gentleman yelled at me for like 20 minutes. He said, it's a small industry. You've burned your bridges. You're never going to get another job in this business. Long story short, I ended up going to Turner Broadcasting. It was actually a game changing moment in my career. And that agency tried to hire me for the next 8 years that followed. So, you just never know what life has in store for you.
Oh my goodness. I think what is a consistent in every experience thus far for you is you never just sort of stuck with the job description, and I mean that in the best way possible. It feels like you were always looking to innovate wherever you were. Like what's a new concept, a new idea? How can we take this bigger? Just even the idea to come in and like propose a panel, which to me is linking so perfectly with sort of your role now with live events and experiences. But
Yeah.
just to have that sense that this is something that's buzzworthy. We'll get people talking. We can promote. It's new and novel.
I think I was always incredibly curious. Like I always knew that I wasn't the smartest person in the room. So I was always curious and open to learning. In fact, years later, when I gave a commencement talk at Columbia Business School, which was very funny to be asked. In fact, when they called me, I said, are you sure you're calling the right person? I sort of made this 4 box. And I thought for me, what I look for in roles or in opportunities is, can I learn? That's a big one for me. Do I work with people I respect? Do I care? And can I have impact? And they seem like 4 basic things, but actually finding those 4 basic things in opportunities is rare. And so, I was open to learning. I was curious. And I think because as a new kid, you're always sort of trying to look around the corner and you're clocking a room and trying to get a lay of the land. Like this idea of being able to see the next thing was something I had sort of like grown up with, right? And so in that sense, I am interested in, the pivots and how do you bring people along and the journey. And I was a student of communication, right? I mean, as a kid who sort of grew up in revolution, I remember how the media impacted things in 1979. I remember how people behaved. Now as you see all the things that are happening in the world, I think a lot about what's happening in terms of movements. There was actually a great article in the FT about how riots happen, and they were talking about the psychology of riots in the UK. But it was something I'd been talking about, which they actually called out, which was about how you're having this incredible loneliness epidemic, right? There's this incredible division in the world. And when that happens, people are seeking community. And sometimes movements just give you other people who give you acceptance and belonging. And the writer in this FT article was calling that out. And it was something that I'd been thinking about as I watched a lot of the things that were happening, because we are living in a very connected yet very disconnected world. And I seriously worry about that for us, not just here in the US, but globally. And I think, as a kid who really lost her sense of belonging and always was looking for it, I'm very attuned to that feeling, right? And knowing that that can lead to lots of problems individually and societally. And how do we actually solve for that? Because we can, because that's something we can all do something about.
Yes, and I think experiences, which I know is a big part of your current focus, are such a powerful way to bring people together. There's still a
Mhm.
magic about live events that you do not get anywhere else. So we finished with Turner. Talk to us about your role there, how you grew with the company, and kind of walk us to your current role at Fortune.
Well, I'm going to do rapid speed for you because then you'll see how many I've had. So I went from Fortune, where I was in a specific group. It was an integrated marketing group. It worked across the Turner portfolio. So I was an internal consultant, like from a marketing and strategy perspective. I went from Turner to go work at City Search, which was in the early days of the internet. Right. And so City Search was like timeout, but online, and you could search it. So for me, again, as somebody who'd been obsessed with like an insiders column, it was seemed like a dream job, right? You could search like, I'm going to the movies and what's a Chinese restaurant nearby. I went to City Search. They hired me for the New York office. I was about to get married, so I wasn't going to join Rollout. And they put New York on pause. So all of a sudden I was like, okay, well, I need to be learning and doing things, and pause is not the right thing for me. I loved that job, but that became sort of a moment. And when I had taken that job, I'd had another offer to join a publishing business. And so they called me and just rechecked in. And I was like, okay, well, pause isn't going to work for me. I can't join Rollout because I'm getting married and I don't want to be living out of a suitcase. and have that relationship work out. And so then I pivoted and went to the slowest part of the media business, which was book publishing. And I was a book publisher. I was younger by like 30 years. And because I didn't know how to do it their way, I just made things up. And I went from book publishing to an agency business. I went back to an agency business where it was media agnostic. So you would come up with an idea. It'd be like, you know what, Burger King, to get people to rethink the experience, you need to actually redo your restaurants because the box like holds them back from actually having a new experience. So we're going to work with David Rockwell. I mean, it was a very big idea. Well, that job turned out to be just not great. And within 2 weeks, I was pretty sure that I made a mistake. And so I got called in one day by the CFO. He said, we're going to shut this department down. They paid me out for 3 months and I was now floating. And remember, in those days, people didn't move jobs that much. And now I had a lot of pivots in my background. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I had sort of seen the writing on the wall within the first couple of days of that job. And I had signed up for an accessory class at FIT because back in when I had the City Search job, I used to carry this like IBM Selectric heavy computer in a pleather bag that I would put in another bag because it was so unattractive. And I had kept thinking to myself, why doesn't somebody just make these functional bags like slightly more attractive? And I also was weirdly obsessed with bags, which I would, hunt down at thrift shops. Anyway, so I take this class at FIT. I make the ugliest bags and belts known to mankind, but in the process, meet a woman who'd been in the bag business. And the two of us decide now that I had this 3-month runway to actually start a bag business. So we started making functional bags fashionable, pet carriers, computer bags, and diaper bags, right? Diaper bags, computer bags, and pet carriers. And I start making these bags. Barney's is my first client. And they actually pay in advance, and we're on a go. And then we take a picture for a press toolkit, and she turns to me after we've taken the photograph, and she says, "I got into Harvard Business School. I'm going." And I'm like, "Wait, what? What is happening to me?" We've literally taken pictures arm in arm, and I was like, "If I can't even use those pictures because I have to cut my arm off." And she's like, "Yeah, but you can be in business with my mom while I go." And I was like, oh my God, what is happening to me? I am now 9 months pregnant. I'm like,
what?
Oh. So we agree to just separate and just have IP to that. And so I make bags. And as I'm making the bags and sort of shipping them out of my basement, I get a call from a former colleague from Turner who's at a company. And he says, would I be willing to come join? I said, no, I'm trying this bag business. He said, okay, but can I hire you as a consultant? I said, I have downtime because I'm waiting for labels to come from China. And so I start doing consulting. So long story short, for 5 years, I shipped bags 2 days a week and had a consulting business for 3 days a week.
Okay. Wow. You even got into the entrepreneurial world.
You weren't expecting that. And who was? Me either.
I wasn't expecting that. And I want to know because, I mean, Maryam, the story is wild. Your career journey is wild. For so many people who are listening, who are business owners, entrepreneurs, oh my goodness, like finding their first customers, finding their first clients, getting things off the ground is such an intimidating part of it. It's the beginnings, right? You're just like, yeah, hey, we got this client, I got Barney's like right off the bat. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the strategy that went into landing your first client?
I mean, so the diaper bags were by far the most popular bag. And basically we made this bag. It had 2 pockets on the side where you could put baby bottles in them, right? This was a long time ago. This was, I don't know, like 1997. And we would make them in like black velvet and fun colors. So they didn't look like a diaper bag. And I would carry them, and I would literally get stopped on the subway by people who would be like, can I buy that? I'm a dancer at the New York Ballet and I'm going to put my point shoes in them. So there was something in these bags you could sort of tell. And I mean, Barney's was the store in New York at the time. And a friend said, I know the baby buyer. And so she gave me her email. Literally, that is how this happened. And now remember, I have less fear than most people because I'm okay being rejected. And I was a marketer. So I'd created a beautiful package. I also had friends who would do me favors. And so Michelle had done a beautiful sort of booklet for us. And, Terry had done the picture. I just called the person and she took the order. And I think so often we're just afraid to make that first outreach, right? Um, and so guess what? Like if you have nothing to lose by trying, it may take 10 tries, but I tried and she took it. And I remember at the time people said Barney's doesn't pay their bills. So I said, you know what? We need to get paid at the front end. And she said, okay. And honestly, that's what happened.
I love that. You also sound like you have just a remarkable network of friends and people in your life who have been extremely influential.
You know what? That I think that is very true. And it's definitely, I think, a key to my worldview. I mean, I really do inherently think everybody has a great story, and I love meeting people and spending time with them. And for me, we make each other better. And so Michelle had been somebody who would work with me when I was at Macmillan. We stayed in touch and she was like, I'll do that for you. Right. And Terry had a book at the time and I'd been willing to help him. And when I needed it, he was willing to return the favor. And I think that is in essence, the power of community. Fast forward years later when New York was in a pretty bad state in the middle of COVID, and we decided to start this nonprofit to help New York City. It was really the power of that connected community of different kinds of people that enabled us to do the most remarkable thing, which is in the middle of the darkest days of New York and COVID, we got 24 Broadway performers, including Bernadette Peters, to sing on the red steps of Times Square.
Wow.
Award-winning Broadway musicians who came into the network, an ad agency partner who'd worked with me for years who did ads for free, Gary Vayner, who gave us social media for free, Clear Channel, who gave us boards for free. It wasn't just my network. It was the network of the 600 other volunteers who had come into the fold. And there is something about something that's very pure, where nobody was making money. We were all doing it for the right reasons. And honestly, it gave us purpose out of despair at a very dark moment. The people are the ones who are going to get you through.
What are some of your best insights, tips, experiences when it comes to relationship building, networking, kind of sustaining relationships over a long period of time?
Well, I mean, I was a kid who had pen pals, so I did stay in touch. I mean, that was me. And this was before the internet. I mean, now it's so much easier. I think for me, I wanted to be connected to all these different pieces of my life. So I made an effort, and I'm a natural connector. I will go out of my way to make connections. I don't think life is a zero-sum game. I think that is how I definitely view the world. And I think that 2 + 2 makes 6. I mean, that's just how I view the world, right? And I am more than happy to be generous and help. I'm always surprised when other people are not, but people are all built differently. For me, life is about a relationship and not a transaction. And something will happen. I'll be at an event and somebody will say, oh, great, you were nice to that person, and now they're going to want to be a sponsor. And I'm always so startled that it's so transactional for somebody. Because for me, yes, great. If I can help you with Fortune, great. But I'm still willing to help you even if it's not related to Fortune. Like it's just not an equation like that for me. So I think that if you genuinely are like that, you begin to find and gravitate towards other people like that. And COVID was a real moment where I was like, it's about we and not me. And these days I say I'm about smart, strong, and kind women or people. And if that's not your jam, like great, but we're not going to spend a ton of time together.
Yeah. So you're running this bag business. You're just having your first child. What was the name of your bag business?
It ended up being called Maryam B because I had to come up with a quick name that I could trademark. So that ended up being mine.
Maryam B. And you're also doing some consulting.
Yep.
What happens next?
So I ended up doing consulting for about 5 years. I had my 2 biggest clients were Bacardi and then Deutsche Bank, which actually was launching a personal banking website in Brazil. So with my second child, I spent every third week in Brazil for a week. I said to my husband who had a startup, like, here are the children. And when I was doing that project, 9/11 happened. We were in World Trade 4. They moved us all to Piscataway, New Jersey. I was like, what am I doing? Finance wasn't really my thing. And I'm spending all this time like commuting to New Jersey. And again, this goes back to the power of your network. A guy who I'd worked with called me and said, I'm taking a job at Univision. Would you be willing to come and talk to them? Not so much for a job, but I just want somebody else to meet them and tell me if you think they're for real. So again, I sort of just did a favor. I took a meeting. Long story short, I end up going back into the corporate world for that job. I think partly because I just come off the world ending, having this existential moment with 9/11, being like, okay, I think this is closer to what I'm actually interested in. And I went back in with a 1-year contract at Univision to really do this integrated selling that I'd done, years before, but at a new company. I didn't really know a lot about Spanish language media. And they were willing to take the risk, and I was willing to take the risk. So I signed a 1-year contract and ended up staying for 7. It was one of my favorite jobs. I closed the bag business because at this point I had to manage people. And so that wasn't really functional. And that's the first place where I became chief marketing officer. So I would say that job was also seminal because, for me, it was actually one of my most fun jobs. People didn't really understand the Hispanic marketplace. And so you were just constantly coming up with new ways of explaining the marketplace, the opportunity. Univision was very community minded. And it's also the place where I discovered purpose. Like in the Jim Collins, what is your North Star as an organization beyond making money? People would call that station to ask for help of all kinds in a way that they would never call their NBC affiliate. And so the power of the community and being there for each other. And remember, the Hispanic marketplace is not a monolith. There's Mexicans and Cubans, but they understood the power of coming together. And I think that was a really great place that I had landed. And so then purpose became the through line of my career ever since that point.
Interesting. Okay. So that was your first time C-suite marketing, leading that. It sounds like you really got to hone this purpose mission, which really has been a larger part of what you've been all about. It was probably just this realization that, okay, this makes sense for me. So what came after that?
So I was at Univision for 7 years. 5 years in, we got sold to 5 private equity firms. So I stayed for 2 years after that and then left and went to NBC Universal. And I would say NBC was definitely the job I would have always wanted. I was a kid who grew up on Friends. I go to NBC Universal to run their integrated marketing group. And a year into that journey, they get put up for sale to Comcast. And I was like, I just went through this. When you get bought by another company, it's always messy. And it ends up being more about the office politics than about the work for a period of time. And I just lived through this at Univision. I was like, okay, what happened to me? And I'd been connected to the folks at Gannett as a favor because they were looking to change that business. And somebody had said, you need a CMO that's kind of this kind of a CMO, because, CMOs come in a lot of sizes and shapes. So I'd taken a meeting and I said, I just want to be clear. I'm not looking for a job. I'm happy to have a conversation to give you advice. And I gave them some names of people. They called me back a couple months later and said, you know what, we met people. We still think you're the right person. I said, I'm not looking for a job. Okay. She said, okay, I'll come back to you in another time. So by this point, we're in the midst of being bought, and I am doing purpose work for the new entity, for NBC and Comcast coming together. I'm spending time doing it for Jeff Zucker, but finishing it for Steve Burke. I'm seeing the mess that's going to come together and what that's going to be like. About at that point, they call me back a third time and say, we think third time might be the charm. And my husband says to me, why don't you take this job? It's like a job in the C-suite. You're all about turnarounds. The local news business is under incredible pressure. You can make a difference. What are you waiting for? And I end up taking this job, commuting to DC from New York. And that also turned out to be a game changer job for me. And I think it was amazing because I always inherently believed in news, right? I believed in news. I believed in storytelling. I believed in media. And local news was under pressure. And I was a kid who grew up with all the president's men. I was like, we need to care. And so bringing purpose there, uncovering their purpose, which had been around for obviously a long time. That was a company that had been around with local newspapers and TV stations and things like that, and USA Today. So also an amazing job. And we were able to do things, that pulled from all these different experiences from the past, but really talked about how they empowered communities, which is what local news is all about, whether it's on TV or in a newspaper. And that was also a really incredible job. And I did that job for about 4 years until we began to split we got to a point where we could split the company in half. And at that point, I sort of knew, okay, well, maybe this won't be where I stay for a long time. And I got a phone call literally from a headhunter who said, would I be willing to talk to the CEO at Hyatt? And I'm pretty wed to New York, right? So I was commuting. You can see I don't just move that easily. I met him. We were both speaking at a Bloomberg conference. We met in between, which, if we both hadn't been scheduled to probably speak, we probably would have taken months to get in our schedules together. And within like half an hour, he's like, when can you move to Chicago? And I'm like, what is happening to me? And
Maryam,
I
you
think
have said that line. Do you see this? I feel like your life is dictated by like what is happening to me when such amazing
sometimes
things are
I
happening.
sometimes feel like Forrest Gump. I'm like, what is happening? Like, wait, how did this happen? And I think, I was very forthright. I was like, you don't know me and I don't know you. I am somebody who will tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Like, people think they want that. They don't always want that. And, they must have reference checked me. At one point, I was like, would you like me to find my preschool teacher in Iran? Because, like, who else would you like to talk to? But, it was one of those moments. I obviously was a kid who loved travel, and, having a global role was really interesting to me. And my husband said, we're going to move to Chicago to his family before I took the job because he was ready. And so we took the leap. I moved a ninth grader and an 11th grader to Chicago and took that job.
That's a big
So it was
move.
definitely not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. But this is what you do. And I wouldn't expect anything less from you. I feel like there's just so much to extract from each of these experiences. We maybe need to do a series, Miriam, where we just go through each one because there's so much to unpack. Let's talk about your current role. Managing Director, Fortune Live Media. You lead the Most Powerful Women brand, which is so cool. And also Brainstorm Tech. Give us a sense of what a day, a week in the life looks like right now. How are you thinking about managing these brands? What are you excited about currently?
Well, so it was when I was at Univision, I got invited to join the Most Powerful Women community when Patty Sellers, who started this franchise, invited me in. And it was a really big deal. It was a big deal, I mean, for me personally, of course, but for Univision, because people had not really taken the Spanish language media seriously. So, senior executives from NBC went, but Univision wasn't on the radar. So getting that invite was a big deal for Univision and for me. And I remember walking into that room and really finding other women who were like me, some who were obviously way more accomplished, but it was business leaders who were interested in the issues of the day, and they happened to be women. Right. And that's its own genre. It's not a women's conference, which is fine. And there's a place for that. This was a conference of people who were all type A people who had busy lives. I joke. It's like you'd find your tribe. You were like, wait, you also have no life? Like, oh my God, this is amazing. But, you're discussing big issues of the day, like what is happening geopolitically and what does that mean for your business? Like what's happening in the market? How do you manage different generations? How do you get on a board? I mean, the conversations are varied, and I think the thing I really loved about it was the breadth of industries that show up, right? Women from lots of different industries and lots of different functions. So they can be a CFO, they can be a GC, they can be a CMO, they can be a CEO or a founder. And as a kid who obviously had a lot of range and interest, to me, that was like a kid in a candy shop. Besides being excited to be let into the club, I made lots of connections and friends and people I stayed in touch with. So I went for 11 years across my various CMO jobs. And last year, I was launching the We Love New York City campaign. And I got asked if I would be a guest co-chair for Fortune Most Powerful Women. And, I was like, okay, I literally said, they sent me an email and said, could we have a conversation with you about that? And I wrote back and I said, I'd be delighted to have a conversation, but you had me at hello. I mean, giving back to the community that had given me so much wasn't much of a conversation in my book. I was like a yes. And so as I was rolling off the We Love New York City campaign, and I had been a guest co-chair, which was really fun, I came to see Alan, who was at the time CEO. And he said, would you consider coming to Fortune and taking over this franchise? Like, you're a community builder. You've come to Brainstorm Tech. You've been part of the MPW community for a long time. You're a community builder. And, Patty left, and we've never had somebody who sort of built community in the same way. Would you consider this role? And so here I am. I took the job in March, and it's been really fun. I think the best part of the job, bar none, besides the amazing team that I get to work with, which, are people who work in production and marketing and incredible journalists. The best part is meeting the people, right? And there are so many people doing really amazing things. And so, now as we're getting close to Most Powerful Woman, I meet 3 new women a day, at least. And I say to my husband every night, like, I mean, they're just the most incredible stories. And that's by far the best part of the job.
Yeah, I imagine that. What is your sort of vision in this role? I love that you joined during Women's Month, by the way. I think that that's really fitting. What's your vision? Where do you want to grow this brand?
For me, the opportunity is to move from a conference to a real community, right? And so I think what we've done just even in the few months that I've been here has been very intentional in building community. So from things like we seat everybody at the dinners, we actually make sure there's a host at each table, that they actually introduce each other so that, no matter how powerful you are, it always feels like middle school when you enter a big room.
It's true.
So how do you actually intentionally connect them with each other so they, make new relationships for all different purposes, right? When we did the New York dinner, I actually was able to book a number from Suffs, the musical. Having done that work for New York City and having connected with people from Broadway, I was able to pull in a favor and have somebody perform, which was really amazing, right? Like joy is something we all need more of. And I think bringing that into this world that, it was a natural was really, really great. And, what is my other visions? Oh, we appointed 20 ambassadors. I say to people, if you have a community, it belongs to the community as much as it belongs to you. And so we asked 20 people who were very passionate about the community if they would be willing to be ambassadors. And they've opened up their network and invited other women who may not have known or been included before to join. And they will be hosts at the event along with us. So, things like that, thinking about the programming, right? Thinking about what might be missing in the programming. I come to the table as a peer. So I come at it differently than somebody who'd been in programming here before or a journalist. So I'm thinking about what I've been in the seat of those women. So I sort of think about it differently. And so as we think about what conversations are going to matter, you need different voices. And I think I'm just a different voice in what was already an incredible equation here at Fortune.
Last question before we get into lightning round. Live events experiences, you have weaved this in with your integrated media campaigns along the way. It's part of what you do now at Fortune. What can brands learn about the power of live experiences and events?
I think today there's an incredible hunger for things that happen in real life. But when you gather people in real life, which we do for live events, it's about insights that people can walk away, be better at their job and at their life, but it's also about connections. And you have to be intentional about how you build community. And so I know we were limited in time, and I'm just going to tell you about this one thing that I've been doing because I think it matters, right? People say to me, like, I don't know how to get 24 Broadway performers to sing on the steps of Times Square or get Billy Joel to give me the rights to New York State of Mind. Like, it's amazing that you did that. I just can't picture doing that myself. And I say that may be the case, although I think everybody can do anything. We've been doing an event in my local neighborhood where we rent tables and chairs and invite neighbors to a potluck. Simple. Everybody can do a potluck. And the reason we do it is because we think connecting people at a hyper local level matters. And so the first year we did it, 500 neighbors showed up. The second year we did it, 700 neighbors showed up. And we're about to do the third year. And I've learned so much about live events from doing that very grassroots event. And so things like distributed responsibility, being willing to cede control, right? Not being like, it needs to be my way and perfect in this way, but saying like, there's hosts, and along this potluck table, there are many hosts, and they do whatever they want for their potluck table, whether it's dressing it up or having their mom make Chinese food or ordering food all the way from Harlem. And that tapestry is incredibly beautiful. And I think in this divided world that we all now live in, finding ways for people to come together in ways where they're just human with each other around arts, important topics, or food or music, like we need to really be thinking about that. And so these different touch points give you different lessons that you can pull through a job like Fortune, which I would never have gotten if I hadn't been just trying to connect neighbors in my neighborhood in Chelsea.
So good. Maryam, I want to dive into our lightning round. It's 5 quick questions to learn a little bit more about you, get some tangible resources for the audience. So first, complete this sentence. To me, building a notable brand means
connecting with someone emotionally and creating a love mark, a brand that is loved and respected.
What has been your career's sort of memorable mic drop moment?
Standing in the middle of Times Square in the middle of the pandemic, seeing those 24 Broadway performers come together for the first time in October, literally crying as they use their voice together to create the magic of Stephen Sondheim's Sunday from Sunday in the Park with George. I mean, to think that a 12-year-old immigrant kid could be in that moment with those people making that happen as a collective, there's nothing like it.
Wow. What's one brand you admire and why?
I think Patagonia. It's the original sort of purpose-driven brand, right? The way he's left the business, I just think like through and through. And, I definitely think that's a brand that lives its mission and purpose, right? It's profitable, but it also has a very clear purpose in terms of how it wants to leave the world.
What are 3 resources you'd recommend to someone looking to build their personal or corporate brand?
Okay, Jim Collins is good to great. I mean, as you can tell, I'm an obsessed Jim Collins reader. Keith Ferrazzi's Never Eat Lunch Alone, because it's how you can figure out, to make friends in meaningful ways. And Priya Parker's The Art of the Gathering. Like having a purpose. I mean, I would definitely recommend her book and her newsletter because she often talks about things that people think are soft, but are things that can become a game changer.
What's up and coming for you? Where can people connect with you?
We're having the longest table in Chelsea on October 6th. And it's actually a movement that's spreading. I was on the phone a couple of days ago with an 8th grader in Kansas City who's trying to create a longest table in her neighborhood to connect with other 8th graders. I mean, what is better than that? Because we give the toolkit and the IP to the longest table to anyone who wants to do one. So please come to the one we're having in Chelsea on October 6th. And if you want to do one in your city or your country, I got a toolkit for you.
Maryam, this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate having been asked, and it was so lovely to be with you.
Thank you for tuning in to Get Mic'd. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. I look forward to bringing you more engaging conversations with thought leaders, sharing their insights on building a notable brand.